Here we are, everybody. Bryan Callen Show. I wanted to go beyond smart talk, and I love hosting these discussions. Sometimes they're discussions, sometimes they turn into debates, but it's all in the quest to get closer to the truth. And I am honored to have two gentlemen who I have listened to. I've listened to their debates. I've listened to their lectures in general. Dr. William Lane Craig is here along with Dr. Michael Ruse. And I'd like to just give you a quick biography before we get into the questions of truth. Does God exist? What does God look like? Who is God? All those questions. So Dr. William Lane Craig is here. He is an American analytic professor, Christian apologist, author, Wesleyan theologian who upholds the view of monolinism. He is currently a professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University and a research professor of philosophy at Biola University, Talbot School of Theology. Craig has updated and defended the argument for the existence of God. He has also published work where he argues in favor of the historical plausibility of the resurrection of Jesus, which that's a big undertaking. Dr. Michael Ruse, a British-born Canadian philosopher of science who specializes in the philosophy of biology and works on the relationship between science and religion, the creation-evolution controversy, and the demarcation problem with science. Ruse currently teaches at Florida State University. Gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the mother of all debates.
Thank you.
I think it's important when you host a debate like this to kind of be transparent on where you stand. I am, as I get older at 56, I am a believer in God. I find myself getting closer to God, not farther away. I seem to be able to more and more develop maybe a rational argument for the existence of God. That's what I'm interested in. I have enormous respect for Christianity as I study it. I was raised a Catholic, but not really. Sort of a wayward Catholic. But I'm fascinated, I guess, with the sort of demarcation here between Dr. Ruse and Dr. Craig in terms of, Dr. Craig, you do argue for the necessity in believing in the resurrection of Jesus. Dr. Ruse, you have a different point of view. I don't know if we want to start this by talking about the validity of Jesus as God. Rather, maybe let's just talk a little bit about your general philosophies, and maybe we can start the conversation that way, or if I'm open to however you guys want to start this conversation.
I think that's a very good way to start. And the other thing I want to say is, yes, it is a debate, but I don't really look upon it as a debate in the sense of at the end we're going to vote, because no, seriously, because I'd win anyway. But more importantly, because I think Craig and I have things that we want to say and we want to interact, and we're both teachers. We want people to go away to think for themselves. With any good luck, they'll say, boy, weren't those guys just wrong? Total nonsense. Now, let me tell you what I think. So
right.
There you go.
Well, I think that's a great, I'm so glad you brought that up, because Dr. Craig, you said when you do have a debate with an atheist, for example, you're not looking to change the person who you're debating's mind. You're trying to open the minds, or at least maybe influence the minds that are open, that are listening. So I appreciate that.
Yes, that's right. I have a real burden for university students, because it was about at that age that I myself became a Christian believer, and my life was radically upended and transformed. And so I want to share with people who are about that same age the good news of the gospel of Christ and God's existence. And I think that the best way to do this is in the context of giving a rational defense of Christian theism. And so Michael and I have actually debated before. We're old friends, and I too look on our conversation today not as a debate, but rather as a dialogue or conversation about these important issues.
That's great. Can you on that, can you just give us a brief sort of history of how you came to this sort of, Saul on the road to Damascus moment? You're such a thoughtful and rather rational man. I mean, you have such a command of history and philosophy. And sometimes I always think it's so anathema. It's almost like that contradiction is always fascinating to me.
Yeah, I would be disingenuous, Bryan, if I tried to portray my conversion experience as the result of objective, cold, rational investigation. As a teenager, I was asking what I call the big questions in life. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of my existence? And as I contemplated my own death and the inevitability of the eventual death of the universe itself, it seemed to me that everything is meaningless, that there is no ultimate value, purpose, or meaning in life. And so I was miserable. I understood the darkness and the despair that I later learned was so aptly described by French existentialist philosophers. And then one year, my junior year in high school, I walked into my German class and sat down behind a girl who is one of these types that is always so happy, it just makes you sick. And I said, Sandy, what are you always so happy about for anyway? And she said, it's because I'm saved. And I said, you're what? And she said, I know Jesus Christ as my personal savior. And at that time, I was starting to go to church. So I said, well, I go to church. And she said, Bill, that's not enough. You've got to have him really living in your heart. And I said, well, what would he want to do a thing like that for? And she said, because he loves you, Bill. And that answer hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was so filled with despair and darkness. And she said that there was someone who loved me. And who was it but the God of the universe? And that thought just staggered me. I couldn't take it in. Well, I went home that night and got a New Testament that had been given to me in the 5th grade by the Gideons when they visited our grade school. And for the first time in my life, I began to read it. And I was absolutely captivated by the person of Jesus of Nazareth. There was a wisdom about this man's teaching that was undeniable. And I felt tremendously attracted to him. And so over the next 6 months, to make a long story short, I went through the most painful and deep period of soul searching in my life that eventually ended in my completely yielding my life to Christ as my Lord and Savior. And that was a transformative moment, as you say, very much a Damascus Road moment for me. And I've never looked back since then.
And Dr. Ruse, you had a similar deconversion. I mean, I think you came up as a Quaker, didn't you?
Yes, very much. In fact, I'm pretty much the inverse of Bill. I was brought up as a Quaker. I was born in 1940. So, as it were, I came to consciousness as 10, 12, that sort of thing. And Quakers, of course, don't have any churches or priests or anything like that. But they have very strong beliefs, particularly about that of God in every person, or what we call the inner light. And that's what makes Himmler so evil and a lion not evil, because Himmler is turning his back on God. So I grew up with this. But of course, I grew up after the Second World War, which was, quote, a good war, as opposed to the First World War, which was just bloody stupid. Right. But, Hitler had to be stopped. My father was a conscientious objector, but he worked with Italian prisoners of war. I mean, he wasn't like Jehovah's Witnesses who said not doing anything. I mean, very much the Quaker way was to say, we're not going to fight. It does not mean we're going to not support our country, whether or not. And of course, we spent an awful lot of time at the age of 10 discussing whether that was hypocritical or not. Can you really free up William Craig to go and fight while Michael Ruse is driving prisoners of war out to the fields to dig ditches? So so I grew up very much with that in a Christian context, but Quakers aren't big on reading the Bible or anything like that. I mean, it's much more the immediacy of it's the third part of the Trinity, the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. That's what really counted for us. And I went away to boarding school, Quaker boarding school, and I hate to say I had inverse experiences from Bill Craig, because when I was away at boarding school, what mattered was, are you good at games? How important is your father? And I have to say, by the time I left there, went to university, I was still a believer. But one day I just woke up and said, I don't think I believe in God. Now, we talked about, Saul on the road to Damascus experience. I did not have in reverse, as it were, suddenly saying, oh my God, Richard Dawkins is right. I'm an atheist.
Yeah. And you criticize the new atheists.
That would be the big embarrassment of my whole life if I ever said anything like that. But anyhow, as I say, it was more like Lewis Carroll's poem, The Hunting of the Snark. The snark was a bosom, you see, softly, like the baker, my faith just softly and silently vanished away. I really thought that by the time I'm 70, I would be back on side, like Anthony Flew was. You get to 70, yes. You can't afford to make mistakes.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd be back on side. What absolutely amazed me was that I did not feel that at 70. I did not feel that at 80. However, what I have found, and I think it's always been there, but increasingly at this age, these sort of moral messages, spiritual messages that I got from Quakerism as a child have become more and more pressing. They've always been pressing, but they're more and more pressing. Now, please understand, the one thing I'm not doing is substituting some kind of humanism for my Christianity. I hate humanists. I don't hate... I always say...
Well, humanists seem to take credit for...
You can't hate Christianity. You just can't.
Right.
I sure as hell can hate humanists, because I think that's just a cop-out. So, as I say, I'm an agnostic. And a final word I'll say is, in many respects, I'm attracted to what is it, apophatic theology, where one can say what God is not, but one can't say what God is. Okay, I've done enough talking.
No, I appreciate that, and that's a great characteristic. My thing about Dr. Craig, I can't get away from the fact that all of us, whether we're atheists, whether we're Quakers, whether we're religious in some way, there seems to be it's very hard to get away from the idea that we admire the example of Christ the man, who died with nothing and gave everything and put his own body below a higher principle. We seem to admire a man like that more than any Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Julius Caesar. There seems to be an inherent understanding that when you walk in someone like Christ's footsteps, that somehow dovetails along with the tide of the universe, at least the good direction that the universe takes. So I find, to your humanist thing, I find that people take credit for the notion that they believe in equality, that slavery is bad, that we are not to judge anyone, that if I kill a wretch on the street or I kill Bill Gates, I do the same amount of time in prison because it's not for me to judge. These are all things that atheists would agree with, but they really do have their roots in Christianity, don't they?
Yes, I think that's true. The moral transformation of Western society as a result of the Christian faith has been enormous and incalculable, I think. And so many of the Enlightenment values that are affirmed by humanists are, in fact, deeply Christian, because Christians believe that man is made in the image and likeness of God and is therefore a bearer of intrinsic moral value and the possessor of inherent human rights, which command respect for other persons and demands that we treat other persons as ends, not merely as means for our own selfish purposes.
Yeah, and that's Dr. Craig. I'm sorry, Dr. Ruse. Can you respond to that? And can you turn your camera? Can you angle your camera down a little bit so I can see more of your chin, sir? I got to see that beard. Fantastic. Look at that.
I don't have a chin. That's why you can't see it. Okay.
But the yellow's a great contrast to that wonderful skin of yours.
But I once had a friend come to stay, and he went into the bathroom in the morning, and he was there for half an hour. And I was wondering if he was doing rude things to his body. I came out, and there was a razor blade package there. I realized he'd been shaving, and I thought, the time I shave every morning by not shaving.
Yeah, I agree.
You and I are part of the same thing.
I'm with you.
Anyhow,
but just to piggyback onto what Dr. Craig said, there does seem to be more truth in that a better way to live would be to walk in Christ's footsteps as opposed to Julius Caesar's footsteps. And that's when you extrapolate in that direction, that's what brings me closer to the Christian example. Am I misguided?
No, you're not. However, what I'd say is, let's put the Christian religion into context. And for me, putting the Christian religion into context basically is Augustine and Aquinas. And I mean, I'm not a Catholic, but I mean, if one looks back, and certainly Protestants owe a huge amount to Augustine, but where did Augustine and Aquinas get their, as it were, philosophical, what should we say, background? Plato and Aristotle. So I mean, without in any sense saying, I don't want to be, obviously Plato and Aristotle weren't Christians, but I see an awful lot of what Bill Craig wants to praise from, as it were, growing up in a Christian environment, a Christian heritage. I'm not going to deny that, but I think it's a mistake to think it's, as it were, it only occurred when Christianity came along, because I would certainly want to put this all in the background of as I say, Plato and Aristotle. I mean, I suppose they're pagans, but that seems very weird to call them that. Socrates might have been. I think Socrates would have enjoyed dancing around the fire, stark naked, with a bunch of good-looking young men, but I don't see that Plato or Aristotle. So right. I'm entirely, at one level, I'm entirely in agreement with Craig, but at another level, I want to say only to stop where he stopped is only to tell half the story.
Dr. Craig.
Well, I would say that we need to remember that Plato and Aristotle were themselves both theists. And so the medievals, like Augustine and Aquinas, found a great deal of commonality with Aristotelian and Platonistic philosophy. So there is a theistic grounding in those worldviews as well, even though they had no knowledge of biblical religion.
Right, in the sense that there was a soul, that you could prove that there were young souls, there were old souls, that this was not this rusty machine, this sort of machinery that my soul is trapped in is not the end all and be all. There is the Isle of the Blessed. There is something beyond this, right? The idea that we can imagine perfection, we can imagine beauty in its perfect form, right? Is that?
Well, you're talking Plato now,
yes.
But as well in Aristotle, he thought of God as being the first uncaused source of order of the cosmos, transcending the cosmos. And so he had this notion of a transcendent God that he called most good, even. It was the source of goodness as well.
Right. But so here's a question for you, Dr. Craig. It seems that Jesus was a first century Jew who believed in the Old Testament and prayed to or talked about the God of the Old Testament. I think that he came along and said, look, we need to simplify this Judaism thing. And let's break it down into two, do unto others and believe in just one God. But is it, I've always had trouble with the idea that it seems to me still that Christians, Jews, and Muslims pray to the same God. The difference here is Jesus took on the embodiment of God to Christians, but Jesus took on the embodiment of the God that Jews and Muslims prayed to, right? So why such a strong delineation?
It's a very important insight that the God of Jesus of Nazareth is the God of the Old Testament. And so people sometimes try to play off the God of the Old Testament against Jesus. when in fact it was the God of Israel that Jesus of Nazareth worshiped and served and called his heavenly Father, and taught his disciples to worship and serve as well. So yes, there is that commonality, and I think where Jews, Christians, and Muslims divide is with regard to the person of Jesus of Nazareth. He is the stumbling stone.
Yes.
That divides us as theists. We're all theists. We believe that God has created the world and revealed himself to the nation of Israel, but neither Jews nor Muslims believe that Jesus is divine, that he is actually God incarnate. And this was one of the most startling transformations in early Christianity of the Judaism that they had inherited. Sometimes biblical scholars have referred to this as a mutation, to borrow a biological metaphor, a radical mutation of Judaism, to think that God is not unipersonal, but he's tripersonal, and that Jesus was, in fact, God incarnate. And so that would be a major difference between us.
Yes. Dr. Ruse, you could say, if I called you a theist, it wouldn't send you into a fit necessarily. You believe in intelligent design to an extent, don't you? It's just the... Can you kind of dilate on?
Well, not to use that language, but go on.
Well, I think that I can see there's a big difference between you and Dr. Craig in that if I were to say to you that Jesus was risen, you would say that makes no biological sense. It's to take everything we know about Darwin, everything we know about evolution, and just throw it out the window. It doesn't mean you don't live a moral life. It doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of you're probably agnostic to the idea that there is some intelligent and maybe benevolent design at the end of the day. Would that be fair?
Well, yes, but I don't think my doubting a physical resurrection actually comes from science at all. I think, once again, it's very much part of my Quakerism that, for me, I'm fully prepared to accept on that Sunday, at some point, the disciples were sitting around feeling absolutely dreadful and downcast. And then suddenly, they said, our Savior lives. And it all changed. Now, I don't give a damn whether that was a physical resurrection, I doubt it was, or whether it was a psychological or what. I mean, the example I always use is Dunkirk. How on earth did the British Army manage to escape and get back? Well, we know there are various sorts of causes. For whatever reason, Hitler decided not to do anything about it, and all of those things. But the main thing is the sea was absolutely flat, and so the smallest ships could go over. Now, if you ask anybody that I grew up with, was Dunkirk a miracle? They'd look at you as though you're queer in the head. Of course it was. Of course it was. It didn't save us, but God made it possible for us to, as it were, recoup and go back again. But was it caused by miracles, or was it a matter of just meteorological laws? I think all of the people would have said, that's not the question you ask. That's totally irrelevant. What's relevant is the meaning. And as far as I'm concerned, that's about the resurrection. Whether or not I want to read into it what Bill Craig wants to read into it is another matter. But I have no problems with the resurrection. I have problems with the idea that miracles must involve change of law. It's like the marriage at Cana. I mean, water into wine. It's a lovely idea, but isn't it much more sensible to say that Jesus or others shamed the host into saying, God, I am a total, well, I can't use the word shit on this program,
yes,
but you know what I mean.
You can swear.
I'm going to go down and get my best Burgundy and bring it up. So I take that to be the real miracle, or the feeding of the 5,000, that the people who got food turned to others and said, please share, please share.
Right.
Now, that for me is the meaning of a miracle. So for me, as I say, I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea of miracles, but it's not even a question of whether or not the laws are broken. It's just the irrelevance of the question of whether or not the laws are broken.
Right, Dr. Craig, why isn't it possible for you to accept that maybe Christ was speaking in metaphor and the resurrection is a metaphor? And why can't you be a good Christian to believe that Jesus didn't have to physically resurrect, but rather there was a metaphorical resurrection. There was a spiritual resurrection. There was a resurrection within our hearts, which we have all the time, right? I mean, the stories that resonate with us, whether we're children and around the world, whether you are an atheist or not, excuse me, is of some kind of a resurrection story, right? Boy to man, girl to woman. You know, the idea that I face my fear, somehow I am on the cross, and I keep my faith, and I fight the dragon even though my sword doesn't work, and I come through because I have faith in a higher, in the fact that I'm guided. The resurrection story is repeated over and over. So why is it that we can't just speak in metaphor when we talk about Christ's resurrection? Why does it have to be the physical resurrection?
I think fundamentally it's because that's not the way the historical sources present it. If they did present it as merely metaphorical change of meaning, fine, but they don't. They present it as a physical event that occurred in space and time and left an empty tomb in its wake, and involved post-mortem appearances of Jesus to the disciples that were far beyond anything that could be explained by natural law. So the sources do present it as a miracle, and we're challenged whether to believe in that or not. Now, the reason I think it's important to affirm its miraculous nature is because it is precisely the resurrection of Jesus that is God's public vindication of Jesus, who was crucified, you remember, because he had allegedly blasphemed God by arrogating to himself prerogatives that belong properly only to God. If this man has been raised from the dead, then God has unequivocally and publicly vindicated those claims. And that would be the basis on which I would be a Christian theist rather than, say, a Jew or a Muslim. It would be because of the authentication of Jesus' claims that is constituted by his supernatural resurrection.
Wow.
Okay, can I be Augustinian at this point?
Please.
And go back to the first verses of Genesis. And of course, we get what was the sun invented on the first day, but daylight doesn't come along until the third or fourth day. Now, St. Augustine said, we got a problem here. Obviously, what are we getting? The ancient Jews would not have understood, cosmology in the way that we sophisticated fourth century Romans can. So, of course, the Bible speaks allegorically. Doesn't mean to say it's false in any sense. Doesn't mean to say, but it does mean that this is a story, but it's the real part of the story is the meaning. And I would go back straight away to the resurrection. I mean, these people had not done philosophy 101. So I don't expect the disciples or any others to be able to make the kind of distinction that I'm making. I mean, I'm not pushing myself up. I mean, I'm repeating arguments of others. But I would say this kind of argument, they wouldn't be able to grasp it properly. So I find nothing odd at all in the story of Jesus rising from the dead and that sort of thing. But I take it that's the same sort of level as God creating the sun on the first day, but not day and night until the third or fourth day. So it doesn't mean the Bible is false, either in Genesis or in the four Gospels.
Yeah, and Dr. Craig, you always talk about the fact that there are contradictions in the text, but it's more of it's an emotional inner knowing, isn't it? Isn't this where
Well, no. I want to respond to what Michael has said, because I've just written, my most recent book is entitled In Quest of the Historical Atom, where I explore these early narratives in the book of Genesis that he just spoken about. And in doing literary interpretation of texts, it is absolutely vital that you first determine the literary genre or type to which that literature belongs. For example, the Psalms are poetry. and therefore are not to be interpreted literalistically. The book of Revelation in the New Testament is Jewish apocalyptic literature, which is filled with symbols, not to be taken literally. On the other hand, the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel are straightforward historical writing. Now, when you come to the opening chapter of Genesis, as Michael has said, this belongs to a type of literature that is mytho-historical. It has very close resemblances to other ancient Near Eastern myths that provide a kind of origin story for a society or culture that anchors the values and institutions of that culture in the deep primordial past. And it's significant literarily that myths need not be taken to be literally true, as Michael said. So I don't take Genesis 1 to describe God's creating the world in 6 consecutive 24-hour days. But here's the crucial point. The New Testament Gospels do not belong to the genre of myth. Scholars such as Richard Burridge and others have shown that the kind of literature that the Gospels most closely resemble is ancient biography, like Plutarch's lives of famous Greeks and Romans. And as a biographical genre, these narratives have a strong interest in history. They purport to give an accurate account of the life and teachings of Jesus, including his crucifixion, burial, empty tomb, and post-mortem appearances. In the 18th and 19th century, there was an attempt to explain away the resurrection narratives on the basis of Greco-Roman mythology. And that has come to be universally rejected by contemporary biblical critics and historians of the life of Jesus. I don't think anyone would defend that today. And so given the literary genre to which they belong, it would just be inaccurate to interpret this on the model of Genesis 1 to 11.
You see, this, I think, Bill, shows the difference between us. How do you regard the book of Ruth?
Oh, I don't know. Michael, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, and I've never studied. I mean, I've read the book of Ruth, but I don't know.
You see, this is the thing. If anybody asks me, what is the most beautiful book in the whole Bible, I would say the book of Ruth. I think when Ruth says to Naomi, whether thou goest, I will go, but your God will be my God. I mean, even now, I go to tears.
Yes.
Now, it seems to me this is a wonderful story about loyalty, devotion, but of course it's also a story about a foreigner becomes part of the group. And dear God, she's the great-grandmother of David. I mean, so I see the book of Ruth as a wonderful story about loyalty, about families, about all of these sorts of things. But is it true? Is it literally true? Was there really a Ruth or not? For me, that just simply doesn't matter.
Well, it may not matter
the meaning
to
of the
you.
story for me.
Yeah, it might not matter to you, Michael, but the question would be, how did the author intend it to be understood? Did he understand it as a historical narrative or as simply a lovely story? And that's going to depend upon your literary genre analysis. The Bible is composed of all sorts of different kinds of literature: poetry, biography, history, epistolary literature, wisdom literature. And in order to interpret the Bible accurately, you cannot have this sort of flattening approach to it. That approach, Michael, is the same as the fundamentalist who just opens the Bible and says, there's a promise, the Bible says it, and I believe it, and that settles it. That kind of flattening hermeneutic is extremely naive and I think very mistaken.
And you see a lot of the new atheists. The new atheists seem to do that with the Bible, with believers, right? The new atheists kind of assume that all believers are literary and they're fundamentalist, and they kind of like reduce it to its parts, and it's never that inspiring. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Dr. Ruse.
Oh, what I was about to say simply was that I think a literary person looking at something which is written down would not necessarily think that what the author was trying to say was necessarily what is being said or necessarily what speaks to us today. I mean, yes, obviously, at some level, the author's intention is all important. But I could well imagine somebody saying, let's say Jane Austen. Somebody reading Jane Austen today could say what she was showing was certain aspects of, say, male-female relationships and these sorts of things that we now, if I say post-Freudian, doesn't mean I'm a Freudian, but you know what I mean, that we today would be inclined to look at this and say, yes, what we see being enacted with Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy and these things, we see now what's going on in a way she might have grasped, but I don't have to say that she would have been able to spell it out in neo-psychiatric or whatever terms. So it's the same with something like the Book of Ruth. It just seems to me, I don't care whether it's true or not. I mean, it would be nice if it is true, but I don't care.
You have to.
What for me is it's the meaning of the thing that counts. And that takes me back to Christianity, is for me, the literal resurrection and all this stuff about it must be true because it was women who first saw him and women didn't have the status that men have. So it can't be, it has to be authentic. Well, somehow, for me, that's almost sacrilegious. We shouldn't be getting into those arguments. We should be getting into what's the meaning of Jesus's love and his death on the cross. Now, I can see a real argument going on, say, between those who believe in substitutionary atonement and those like Eastern Orthodox and Quakers who think, no, it's more an example of perfect love. I can see meaningful arguments there. But, oh, my God, it must be true because it was women who first reported on it. Give me a break.
Well, Michael, that argument, and just to make it clear for our listeners, this is an argument that has persuaded probably the wide majority of New Testament critics, Jesus scholars, that the narrative of the empty tomb is not just a metaphor, but it's an actual historical event. Why? Because if this were just a literary creation of the early church, in that patriarchal culture, they would have had male disciples discover the empty tomb. Peter or John, whose witness was credible in that society. The fact that it is women whose witness was regarded as untrustworthy and worthless is best explained by the fact that, like it or not, they were the discoverers of the empty tomb, and the gospel writers faithfully record this. Now, I grant you that doesn't give you the meaning of the narrative and its subjective importance for one today, but at a historical level, this is a really important argument that most New Testament scholars have found compelling.
You know, Dr. Craig, you said something very interesting, and I want you to respond to this in a second, Dr. Ruse, because you are somebody who believes in objective truth, and I think that human beings have a predilection to sort of believe in an objective truth. Even if you were to say, and you said something really profound to me, you said, I listened to you at a debate, you said, well, there's no such thing as an objective truth. Except for that statement, which must be an objective truth. The objective truth, there's no objective truth. So it's a trap that a human being, it's impossible to get out of when you, every time I read all the philosophy I find myself going in a circle. And Dr. Ruse, where do you find objective truth? And is objective truth the goal here? Even without the idea of Christ being God or even God being the God of the Old Testament or whatever, where do we find objective truth? And is objective truth worth the endeavor, worth the reach, I suppose?
Who's that a question for?
Oh, that was for you, Dr. Ruse. Because it seems to me that the objective truth that Dr. Lane is arguing for is that Christ was risen, and that he was indeed God, and then he's got his body of work to prove that that is the case. Where is the idea of looking for truth, and I'm saying objective truth, worth the effort?
Oh yes. But obviously, we differ over what is objective truth. I mean, I'm getting the feeling that we're in a Kuhnian situation here, that we've got two paradigms and they're incommensurable. It doesn't mean that Bill Craig is stupid, or even though, I might go away and say, my God, that was a bloody silly argument, wasn't it? But it doesn't mean that. It means that he's seeing from one perspective, the rabbit, if you know, and I'm seeing from the other perspective, the duck. And I have a feeling, you see, I want to talk about objective truth just as much as Bill does. But if I were a Christian, I would be absolutely committed to the idea of objective truth, that yes, Christ did rise, but what did that mean? It meant that the disciples felt in their hearts, in their minds, that their Savior had not left them. He was there. He was supporting them, and he was obviously telling them, you can't just sit on your bums now, folks. This story is only just beginning. You've got to go out and do something about this. For me, I can't think of any more objective truth than that, any more than the crucifixion. I mean, I want to say, yes, obviously, Jesus sacrificed himself. Why? Well, of course, there we differ, but perhaps we differ over how you interpret it. But so I worry about talks about objective truth in this sort of sense, because I would want to say my position, I mean, daft, isn't it? But if I held it, would be just as objectively true as Bill Craig's position would be. So, here we've got the difficulty of the two. Mark, if I can just slew a little bit, I'm wondering, could we talk, at least at some point, about what we actually do believe about God?
Yes.
And what we actually do believe about the hereafter?
Yes.
Because let me say what my position is. And my position, very quakily, it's almost mysticism appeals to me. That, as it were, these are unknown. Why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, I don't think that's a stupid question, like Wittgenstein and others thought. I think it's a perfectly meaningful question. It's just, I have no answer to it. I just have no answer to it. So as JBS Haldane said, not only is the world queerer than we think it is, it's queerer than we could think it is. And for me, something like body-mind that's a miracle. Why the hell can molecules think? I mean, and don't give me all the stuff about, Dan Dennett and materialism, or others, Nick Humphrey and emergentism. That don't work. I mean, we've got a real mystery there, like quantum entanglement. So I find this a very mysterious world that we live in. I don't think, however, that guarantees that there's going to be a hereafter. I would think as likely as not, we're going to have what Socrates called, an eternity of dreamless sleep, or something along those lines, if you were to ask me to put my money on it. But I just don't know. So for me, what makes my life meaningful in a way is it's a mystery. And so now the question becomes, what do I, Michael Ruse, do in this? Do I go with, saying simply, like Camus said, oh, well, it's all absurd? Or do I say, I'm going to make some meaning out of my life here and now? I know, last Saturday, the Met High D had Don Giovanni. I came away and said, how can anybody say this life of ours is absurd when somebody can create something so miraculously beautiful and people can interpret it? So as far as I'm concerned, what do you call it? The Pelagian heresy? If you do everything trying to get into heaven? I think here we are, and our job is to love others and to work with others and to have discussions like this. Because obviously, Bill, you and I aren't just, as I say, we're not debating. We're trying to explore, we're trying to offer ideas, and we're hoping that the hundreds of thousands of people who are going to watch this YouTube podcast are going to come away and say, both Craig and Ruse were totally full of it. Now, let me tell you what I...
No.
That's what we want as teachers.
But I think we're also trying to get closer to the truth. These discussions have merit because in our heart of hearts, all of us are making this effort especially as we get older and we get more passionate about it because we're trying to get closer to the truth. That to me is where I start finding faith. So yes, mystery. Yes, I'm a romantic. Yes, I love wondering. And don't pull back the curtain and show me all the machinations. It'll show me the methodology, but it's still not going to tell me why. And we can't get out of the fact that we are sitting here, the three of us, we can say what we want, but we're not talking in circles. We really do want to get close to the truth, and that's the value here. And so that Dr. Craig always leads me closer to the idea that I need scaffolding. I need bedrock I can anchor into. And if that means I have to accept or embrace an objective truth, even if it's an act of faith in saying Jesus was God, I can understand why that's a very important thing to embrace. It really is an act of faith, and it's a very scary one, but I'm sorry, but that's just my 2 cents of kind of seeing where you're headed.
I want to reinforce what you're saying about the importance of the quest for objective truth, because Michael and I, at a very deep level, fundamentally agree that there is objective truth out there to be found. It's not just all in your head. It's not all subjective. There is a way the world is. And I think that we also agree on many of the methods to find objective truth, such as logic, empirical evidence, rational intuition, and argument. And that's why I reject the incommensurability thesis that you spoke of, Michael, from Thomas Kuhn. I think there are ways of adjudicating these competing paradigms of reality, and therefore I'm prepared to give arguments on behalf of the theistic worldview that I think make it more plausibly true than the atheistic or agnostic worldview.
Well, let me just swing round on that and bring up 2 things. One that troubled John Hick a great deal, who incidentally became a Quaker at the end of his life and went to the same school that I went to. But
he was my doctoral mentor. He was my doctoral mentor.
The bloody awful headmaster I had. Anyhow, how do you deal then with a Buddhist who grows up totally ignorant of Judaism, of Jesus, of any of these things, but nevertheless, as we look at their life objectively, we want to say, yes, that truly was a good person. They cared about others. They cared about their family. They tried to tell the truth. They tried to help others. All of these sorts of things. But they did it in total ignorance of Jesus, of any of these things. Now, that's the one problem I have. And of course, the other one is the problem of evil. How on earth do you say your God with Heinrich Himmler?
Well, the problem of the fate of the unevangelized, as it's called, is an issue on which Christians have a diversity of views. My own view is that the New Testament teaches that God judges people on the basis of the information they have. And so people who have never had the advantage of hearing the gospel of Christ will not be judged on the basis of their faith in Christ, because that would be manifestly unfair. Rather, they'll be judged on the basis of their response to the light that they have. Now, how that is, or how their response is, that's up to God. I'm glad it's not up to me to judge. But I don't think anyone will be unfairly condemned because of the accidents of history and geography.
That's a great answer. I didn't expect that answer from you, Dr. Craig.
I've written fairly extensively on this, actually. And I remember at the beginning you introduced me by saying I'm a Molinist.
Yes.
Which probably most of your audience wouldn't.
I don't know what that means.
I've offered a Molinist perspective on this problem of the unevangelized as well that I think is very provocative and helpful.
Very much so.
Go on. Tell us what it is.
Oh, well, it is that God, prior to his decree to create the world, knew what every free person would freely do in any circumstances in which he would place that person. And so God has so providentially ordered the world that everyone who he knew would freely respond to the gospel if he heard it is created at a time and place in history where he does hear it. And so long as that's even possible, it shows that there's no inconsistency between God's being all loving and all powerful and some people not hearing the gospel and being lost.
Gosh, that seems to me even more out to sea than it must be true because there were only women who saw.
That's a good. If you disagree with the women argument, you are putting yourself in opposition to a wide majority of New Testament historians. You don't have to buy my Molinist view, but my Molinist view merely needs to be possible in order to solve the objection. It's like a free will defense of the problem of evil. It just needs to be possibly true.
But God. Well, the problem of evil, I mean, I don't know what you say. I mean, at a certain level, I find myself almost, sympathetic to process theology at this point, that, God is struggling along with the rest of us at some sort of level. And I mean, I'm not saying I believe this, but I do find aspects of it very attractive. The thought that when Anne Frank is dying in Bergen-Belsen, God is there suffering with her. I find I
would affirm that as well. I don't believe in the impassible deity of Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
What is the impassible deity? What is the impassible deity?
Are you sort of cherry picking the Christian beliefs you want?
No. I take the New Testament. I take the revelation in Scripture as my norm for Christian doctrine. And the things that it clearly affirms, I will affirm. But the things that it leaves open is a matter for philosophical and theological debate. And doctrines like impassibility and simplicity and timelessness are clearly, I should say, are not taught. They clearly are not taught in the New Testament. And so these are open questions to be explored and the answer's provisionally held.
Dr. Ruse, do you believe that there is a direction in history? Do you think that we are moving are we moving closer to the truth as human beings? Are we going to, is there a direction? Is there a purpose to history? Because, when you talk about evolution versus creationism, for example, evolution is provable. You can point to evolution, and there are a lot of examples of evolution. That doesn't mean evolution doesn't exist within a larger context. There may be a larger truth within that sort of embodies or circles evolution, right? So, is there? Do you ever? How do you wrestle with the idea that there is? Is there a direction? Is this circular existence, or is there an alpha and an omega?
I'm very dubious about drawing analogies between what happens in biology or the physical world or our knowledge and what happens in the cultural level. Yes, I do believe that we know a lot more than people did, let's say, 500 years ago. I mean, I think that the double helix is right. And I think that the double helix has led to some very interesting, even practical, answers. I mean, GM foods. I mean, I'm not unaware that there are debates around it. But as I see, if I were going to use the word progress, I would be happy to do that. When it comes to human societies, the problem is, yes, if I look at the last century, I think we have made progress. I think the United Nations, for all its problems, prevented a third world war, which might very easily have happened. On the other hand, I say to myself, if I were to forecast in the next, let's say, 2,000 years, 20,000, let's say 20,000 years, will some weirdo in the North Korea of the time let off atomic bombs, which of course will be responded. And the next thing is, like the Neville Shute story on the beach. It's going to get us all. So I don't want to say that's going to happen, but I'm very unwilling to say that progress, social, cultural, if you like, progress is necessarily forward. I mean, frankly, in my own state of Florida, I think in the last year, we've seen an awful lot of anti-progress, cutting down on blacks getting elected. Probably you disagree with me on this, but the opposition or oppression of women with respect to abortion, the anti-gay, all of these things, anti-immigrant, which is something I feel very badly about, particularly since I'm one. Well, I am. But so I'm not convinced that progress is necessary. I mean, if you want an example of where progress does not happen, Brexit. I cannot think of a more stupid thing to do than Brexit. Although I know why.
I was actually talking more.
I grew up in England. I know about the English.
I wasn't talking so much about policy, and I agree with our ebbs and flows. And we've always got this debate between right and left and liberal conservative, which I think is by design, because I think you need both in a society because they fulfill different roles. But I was talking more about the idea that there's a dark side to technology, but there's also a side to technology. I always wonder, as we are tapping into the neural net and the internet brings us closer to understanding what it is like to be someone else. You can have these virtual experiences about what it's like to be a refugee in a tent somewhere and things like that. There does seem to be this idea that human beings are more aware. So someone in Iran, a woman in Iran who gets shot at a protest rally, and her father is holding her as she's bleeding out on the pavement. All of us, whether she's in a hijab or whatever, all of us who are rational people understand that person there is dying exactly the way my wife would die. That father there is feeling exactly how I would feel if I was holding my child, even though I'm a world away. I don't think I think that is something that's different. I think that Christianity has always preached that and tried to bring, or religions have, let's say. But I do think that we are able to see that more and more with technology. And I guess I was asking, that seems to be for a reason. That seems to be, it does feel like we are being nudged closer together. I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. I don't know what miniaturization of thermonuclear weaponry will be, or gene editing when you can edit a virus that can kill all of us. I don't know when the apocalypse comes, if it ever does, but it does seem that there is a direction. It feels like we are all, at least all of us, believe in some direction, even if you're a scientist and a radical atheist. The idea is science can free us. Science will move us in a direction that is pain-free. We'll live much longer, maybe forever. This is the Ray Kurzweil thing, right? The scientists are just as religious in many ways about their science. And I think human beings can't escape the idea that we believe in something. We believe in something. So maybe I don't know if there's a question there. I just want to throw that out there.
I think that although many evolutionary biologists would disagree with this, it's obvious that the evolutionary process exhibits progress from primitive bacteria up through eukaryotic cells, on up to fishes and amphibians and mammals, and finally, human beings. The history of life on this planet has been one of increasing diversification and complexity. And so there's definitely a direction to evolution in that sense. And even more important, there is progress and directionality in terms of self-consciousness, rationality, and the realization of the moral idea that moral values come to be expressed in man. You have in man a moral agent endowed as we said earlier, with intrinsic moral value. And that's why we recognize that killing in Iran to be as morally abominable as the killing of one of our loved ones. It is because of that intrinsic human value that did not exist in the evolutionary process previous to the origin of man on this planet. So I think there's definitely progress to the evolutionary process of life. But here is the dark note, the sad note. As I said at the beginning, when I described my teenage despair over the prospect of death, all of this is doomed to destruction in the heat death of the universe. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder. Eventually, all the stars will burn out and there will be no light. There will be no life. The stars will collapse into dead stars and black holes, which then may dissolve eventually into a thin gas of radiation expanding into the endless darkness and the cold recesses of space. And this is not science fiction. This is the way it's really going to be if God does not exist, if atheism is true. So on the atheistic story of life, in the end, it's a tragedy. There ultimately is no hope. There is no purpose, which we are realizing everything is doomed to destruction.
What about multiverses?
Right. In each multiverse, you will have that thermodynamic demise of that universe within the multiverse, so that each portion of the multiverse will become increasingly marooned and isolated from other parts and will soon grow, well, not soon, eventually grow dark, cold, dilute, and dead. So that ultimately that doesn't provide a means of escape, wholly apart from the question of whether there really is a multiverse out there.
Yeah. Well, of course, you could, if you have multiverses, I don't see any issue about multiverses, being created, or however it is coming into being on a temporal basis. I mean, we know that our universe has a temporal basis, doesn't? What is it, 18 billion years ago or whatever? So, but you see, this is part of the problem. I think where we are divided is that for you, there is a meaning to it all with a capital M, and this is all important for you, and this is how you put your perspective. Whereas, if you like, I really am an existentialist. I don't have that comfort, if you like. Yes. I think that if you want to say life is meaningless at some sort of level, however, I don't think it, as I was saying, I don't think that means there's no meaning or anything like that. I just feel that we've got to recast the way we think. And so even if you're right, for me, I would rather go my way than, as it were, say, well, it's really important to get on side, before it's too late. So this is my problem, is I just don't have that, well, what is it, sense of divinitatis or something like that, that Plantinga's always going on about. So
but can you accept?
Here? I mean, as I say, I'm not an atheist. If anything, apophatic theology, it suits me. That I can say that God is not Michelangelo's God, holding out his hand to Adam, and a lot of other things. I mean, obviously,
but that's a meaningful statement.
It's just like a human writ large, because if he is, I don't know how the hell you could explain Heinrich Himmler. So for me, so much of it is just a mystery. And without, well, of course, now it's going to come round, without saying I'm a braver person than you are, Bill Craig, I am, because I'm prepared to face up to, as it were, the abyss in a way. And I don't really mean this in a nasty way, but I think you, as it were, took another path when you were 16, or however old it was when you were chatting up this girl in front of you.
But Dr. Ruse, you are looking for meaning. The whole point of this conversation and your life and asking these questions and studying the leaders of thought in all these fields I believe, is points to the fact that you are in one way or another at least trying to get closer to something like the truth, or get closer to being more right than you were wrong. And so what is that direction, if we were to extrapolate that direction that you seem to have dedicated your life to? Isn't that where you're looking for meaning? Aren't you in the direction of truth when you're trying to do that? Aren't you? Because you are agnostic, but you are pretty religious in some ways, it sounds like. It's hard to get out of this trap. I don't think that you are a man who says, well, it's all meaningless. I don't believe that. That's you wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't.
Well, just an interjection. When you call me Dr. Ruse, I feel terribly embarrassed. The only people who ever called me Dr. Ruse were students who hadn't done their assignments.
That would be me. That would be me. I've always been a hopeless student.
And you look like the kind of student that I'd have trouble with. When I say midnight on Monday, I do not mean 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning.
That's me, baby. Anyhow, I come up with 1,000 excuses.
Yes, I would like to make it clear that what I said about the ultimate hopelessness and purposelessness of an atheistic view is not meant to be an argument that atheism is false. It may very well be the case that the truth that we're talking about is dark and tragic. But I think what this does go to show is the importance of the question. I don't think anyone can live consistently and happily within the atheistic framework of life, because it would force you to regard your own life and moral decisions as ultimately meaningless and purposeless. But I think it underlines the importance of asking ourselves, well, which view of the world is true? Is a theistic worldview true, or is an atheistic worldview true? And we haven't actually discussed any of the arguments for the existence of God this afternoon. Maybe we'll need to have another program where we get around to that.
I would love to do that.
I would defend various arguments to break this incommensurability that Michael describes, and give some grounds for thinking that a theistic worldview is actually true.
Can we do a round 2 on that? I would just love to do that. It's just we can start there.
Yes, and you're right, actually, Bill. Of course, we haven't discussed these things. However,
which was the topic for today, right?
Yeah, but I think we both agree that we have been engaged in really important issues.
Yes,
we've not been, as it were, shunting it on one side because these are too difficult or they're just going to lead to clashes. I think, personally, the way this conversation has gone has been fantastic. Really, I mean, I think that we've grappled with some issues that really need to be brought out and be discussed. But I don't know how much longer we're going to go on.
We've got about 5 minutes.
Just simply say that I take the challenge of the meaningless, metaphysical meaningless of the whole thing to be a challenge as to don't give up. Don't just sit on your bottom and, like the chap in the A. Mills story, and he sat on his bottom until he was saved. No, I think what we try to do is make meaning of our life as it is. And I would say serving others and also inquiring about the world, epistemology and ethics. And I think you can make for a very meaningful life. Dear God, this last hour, anybody who said that this has just been meaningless or something like that, well, yeah, they flunked. I'm not going to pass them. Maybe you would, because you're a Christian and you're nicer than I am. But as far as I'm concerned, what we've been doing is something which is tremendously meaningful. It's not meaningful with a capital M. But
well, I think it is. I'll say with a capital M. That's where we do it.
Well, Dr. Craig, can you tease us with maybe if you guys would grace me with another of these? I want to do a round 2 because I'd like to. Can you just in closing, give me an idea of what you wanted to do and where you wanted to make the argument for the existence of God?
Yes. The question was why believe in God?
Yes.
Right. And so I interpreted that question at one level to be asking, well, are there any good arguments for God? And so in my published work, I've defended about 6 different arguments for God that I think make a powerful cumulative case.
Can you go through those 6? Can you give us the footnotes?
If I might say so,
Yes.
I think that is a hint for round 2.
100%.
I think that's would be a really good place to start.
Yeah.
Where do we stand, first of all, on reason versus faith? But then what do you think that reason can do? And I think that I see that as something we obviously haven't talked about today, that we should talk about. But let's make it, as it were, round 2, rather than add it on.
Could I be permitted to simply list the arguments that I had?
Yes, please. And I want to apologize to everybody. I was so excited about having you both on that I got kind of wrapped up in everything, and I did a terrible job of sort of pushing you in that direction. But I've been enjoying just this whole conversation. So we definitely need a round 2. But please state the 6 arguments, and then I want to get into that next time.
So here's just a list of arguments that I would be prepared to discuss with Michael. Number 1, God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists rather than nothing. 2, God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at a point in the finite past. Number 3, God is the best explanation for the applicability of mathematics to the physical world. Number 4, God is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe for embodied intelligent life. Number 5, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and moral duties. And finally, number 6 would be that the very possibility of God's existence entails that God actually does exist.
You just got punched 6 times. 6 times you just got punched.
I'm salivating. I'm salivating.
Yes! We have laid the groundwork. This has been nothing but an introduction, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Craig, Dr. Ruse, I will continue to call you that because I'm not a good student. As you can tell, I got lost, but I got so excited, and I'm still very excited. So please grace us for round 2. This has been a teaser. This was the appetizer for the main event that is going to come up. This has basically been the weigh-in and the stare down. And I am honored that you graced me and this podcast with your time and your ideas. And I think this is the most important discussion, at least in my life. So I'm very, very excited. And I want to thank you both for taking the time. Please allow me to, I'll reach out and we'll try to schedule round 2 sooner than later, I hope, because this is, I'm salivating as well. You threw 6 punches, 6 punches.
I'll give you till 5 o'clock this afternoon to get in that paper without taking marks off, okay?
I'm on it. I promise Brian Booth will reach out to both of you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And
Bill, to be with you, Michael.
Thank you too. I love talking to people like you. I just, no, and I say, it's not a debate. I mean, obviously, we want to make our points, but I feel that we haven't been trying to, as it were, score points. These are important issues, and they should be talked about by very intelligent and very learned people.
You're both good men.
Before I say any more.
You're both good men, and you do good work, I have to tell you. And it's really an honor to be part of this conversation.
Okay. Thanks a lot, folks.
Talk to you soon. We'll schedule it right now. Thank you, gentlemen.